Welcome back to the channel. My name is Caleb Johnston, and today, sorry, I got to pull my notes up. We are going to be discussing my paranormal experience and where I plan to go from here. As many of you may know, I am a agnostic of sorts and a healthy skeptic, where I try to be good with it. I don't try to be overly skeptical, and somebody who previously considered a lot of these accounts to be not that viable. I tended to go with a more natural explanation and just assume that was what happened, and there are extenuating circumstances and times when people might hallucinate or over exaggerate, or a story might develop or pass through, the building of a rumor, da 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 da. So, as somebody who previously thought that way and still does to a degree, where am I going to go with this? Where am I going to go with what I have witnessed and seen? Now, that might sound a bit ominous, like what I've witnessed, but no, please, just a quick disclaimer, this is not anything ridiculous. It is no demon throwing me around the room, me possessed, my eyes rolling back to my head, the mirror shattering, and then voices and nightmares and terrors and blah, 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 blah. Nothing like that. So, 5 or 6 months back, just for some backstory, it was kind of the middle of my deconstruction phase. And I started to think, you know what? I've been afraid of like Ouija boards and all that for so long. I am going to shatter that fear. I am going to prove it definitively to be wrong, to not be wrong, but false. Like this stuff is not real. It's entirely an act of the mind, and I'm going to basically put a nail in the coffin of my spiritualism and take a nail out of the coffin of my skepticism. That's confusing, but you get the metaphor. So I decided to play the Charlie Charlie game. And if any of you guys have heard of it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But feel free to look it up. It's right on the front page. You can find the rules right there. Just go Google it. It's not that complicated, which is why I picked it, because I didn't want to go out and buy a Ouija board or something and set it up and try to go through some ridiculous thing with a group of people when I already didn't find it to be viable that anything would happen in the first place. So I set up the Charlie Charlie game. It's literally just a piece of paper and two pencils. You put yes and yes in two corners and no in two corners opposite from each other, and you draw an X in the middle. Balance the pencils on top of each other. So you have to get that perfect balance. It takes a bit. You kind of have to tweak it back and forth. And when you're nervous, like I was, you're sitting there like knocking it off every whatever time. So once you get it on that hair width balance, you you sit there in front of it and you ask the entity if we can play the game. Like, hey, can we play? And I used far too many ands in that sentence, but once you ask the question, it will supposedly either move to yes or no, allegedly. And once it is moved to yes, if that is the case, then it means you can play, and you set the pencil back on the center, so rebalance it, and continue asking questions until you want to end the game. I mean, really, there's not that much. Everybody has this stuff in their home. It's simple school supplies. So I thought, hey, it's worth a try. And as you can probably expect, nothing happened. Absolutely nil. Nothing. I stood there looking at the pencils in terror, waiting for it. And I basically ended up just laughing my head off at what I had tried. I was going, well, what did I expect? Of course it's not real. And I tore the paper up, put the pencils away, and sort of put it to the back of my mind. I had definitively proved that that stuff was fake. Or so I had thought at the time. But, it was perfectly reasonable. I was looking for something to prove my point, and I proved it, which is kind of what I guess you get what you wish for, sort of thing. But 5 or 6 months later, let's kind of come to the present day now. I decided, okay, listen, I have been watching a lot of videos by people like Pints with Aquinas and interviews with people on capturing Christianity, and I'm not saying those things proved anything to me. But if anything, they just kind of made me more aware, as somebody who wants to be open-minded, of experiences that others have allegedly had and accounts that people have made of not as easily explained phenomena. And I just started thinking, well, what if I had been trying too hard to prove myself wrong? What if I go into this with an open mind, trying to experiment to figure out if these things are valid, if there is something there? I don't know what that thing is. That doesn't mean it's some paranormal demon, but at least that there is something that causes something to occur outside of what we consider natural physical causes. So, I keep saying so, but I promise I'll get to the end of the point. I decided I'm going to set up the game and I'm going to try it again. Got the pencils, got the paper, set it up, balanced it, and asked the initial question. Nothing happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Unless it moved like a tiny bit and I just didn't notice it, there was no substantial phenomenon, nothing that would lead me to get rid of the natural causes. It was just sitting there, similar to the first time I tried it, basically just a repeat. But instead of laughing, I thought, okay, let's just retry it. So I threw away the paper, used the same pencils, but reordered. I basically put one on top of the other that was not last time, and I redid it as neatly as possible to make sure that I wasn't missing any details or rushing anything, and stood up instead of sat down. That was the big difference. I was kneeling the first time, so I stood up. I was like, I'm just going to reverse some stuff, see if it changes anything. Boom. I put the pencil on top of the other one, and I ask, can we begin? What do you know? The pencil shifts to the yes. Not just the yes square, but the yes, the actual word yes in the center of the square, and stops. Pretty much at that point, of course, as kind of anyone would after the first experience had made me expect nothing, I kind of panicked. So I didn't continue the game after that point. But that was when I started to, about, 20, 30 minutes later, go through my mind and just rifle through the explanations that possibly could be. On a bit of further research, I was made aware that there were a lot of people who denounced that even within communities of those who accepted paranormal occurrences as being valid demonic entities or something, a lot of them simply found it to be a hoax most of the time, and that most people were doing it and faking it intentionally for attention. Not like the Ouija board, which has a lot more people who would swear by it. This game was kind of just, oh, it's a good party trick, but no, it doesn't actually summon a demon. So that kind of put a bit of a quizzical nature to it, because I had to think, well, wait a minute, there are a lot of people even within scientific, or no, non like unscientific, more paranormal communities who would argue, hey, no, it's definitely not a real demon. So that kind of shocked me a tiny bit. And then I realized there was a leading scientific natural hypothesis, which I had been looking into before, which is simply that because of the way that it is balanced, it allows for any gust of wind or any movement or any vibration to cause it to move. This was a perfectly reasonable explanation, a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. It makes a lot of sense. A little bit of wind is all it takes to move it. I mean, I had tried, blowing on it with my hands and just, puffing on it, but there was nothing that seemed to indicate that that's not possible. I also did have two fans in the room at the time. The reason that this explanation kind of passed me by as a bit, I don't know, implausible, is the fact that I specifically made sure beforehand, being aware of that, to check the area around where I was doing the ritual, the divination. And I just, to this day, every time I check that area, to this time, I found nothing that would indicate there would be any gust of wind strong enough to move those pencils more than what I had already been trying to make it do. And so although I still haven't ruled out, it just doesn't satisfy me as much. It doesn't bring me to the same, oh yeah, that was what it was. It's still there, as somebody who's open-minded. I always want to leave options open for plausible plausible interpretations, but it didn't completely bring me to a philosophically justified point of understanding. And now, further, as I said, this is the same thing that a lot of people were arguing happens online. Even the people who accepted demonic forces as being some physical thing or something in another world beyond ours, even they said, oh, well, it's what happens when you blow on it, or it's because of air in the room, or because of a weird force of gravity. But no, it just didn't come across to me as the way that it should have been. And as I mentioned before, the movement that occurred was one that was perfect. Now, that sounds a bit stupid, but it was ordered. The movement was not one, spinning before I asked the question, two, continuing to spin after the end of the answer. Now, let me just kind of go into that a bit because it sounded a bit dumb, but my point is that when I asked the question, the answer occurred immediately afterwards. I asked, finished my sentence, it swung to the yes. It did not slowly drift. It did not move a bit, stop, continue moving. It was not already kind of twitching towards that way, and then my question forced it. Like I just sort of assumed that, oh, well, it was already moving because it knew what I was going to ask. Like, no, it started moving when I asked the question. At the end of the question, the moment that you would expect a human to answer in real life, that was when it answered, or that was when it moved. And when it did reach the yes, it stopped. Now, if it was a continual pressure of wind from a fan or something, or a continual difference of gravity or a tilting of a desk or something, you would expect the pencil to continue past that yes, or at least to continue moving at some point in the future, which I gave it about 5 minutes after without moving anything. So you'd expect, well, something's going to move, right? Something's going to continue beyond that. It's going to continue beyond that yes. It's going to keep swinging just ambiently because it would be highly unlikely that a puff of wind would come through and then not come through ever again for who knows how long in that same area and at that same timing. So at the same time, while I do find it to be a decent concept, if you just look at how well ordered it was, that explanation doesn't eliminate all possibilities. Now, of course, once again, we could also go back to a mental or psychological explanation. For instance, that I was hallucinating it. And that is also totally plausible. I'm totally okay with that. I simply find it, I just don't find any way to justify it. I could have been hallucinating. I have no proof of it. I felt perfectly lucid. I was in the room at a certain time. There was no period before where my memory fails or period after when my memory fails. I remember the whole night perfectly up to that point and after that point when I fell asleep. There were no falsified memories. I recorded everything in text, and really, there's nothing else to go on in that period. So I kind of eliminated that hypothesis, even if it's like in the 1 or 2% probability. Um, but with that being said, that leaves only two hypotheses. 1B, I wrote these down in a weird order. 1B is that it is unexplained natural force. It is an unexplained natural occurrence. So something that we just don't understand with science yet, but it is still quote unquote natural, not a demon or spiritual entity that goes beyond our understanding from another realm or something. Once again, I only add this in there because there are those who talk about that being a possibility, and you have to be open-minded to it, which I'm totally cool with. I just find it to be kind of, one of those things that makes people look at you like, wow, you're really trying, aren't you? You're really trying to explain it away. Or the the final hypothesis that I haven't really gone into yet is that it was indeed a supernatural force, whether a demon, a spirit, or a being of any variety. That that's the other hypothesis, the one that to me seems the most satisfying when it comes to the order of the occurrence, the timing of the occurrence, and the fact that I can't find any of the other hypotheses to be on the same level as that one. So, with that being said, that's past the explanations. I went on for far too long, but the truth is, this doesn't change much. It is important, but it doesn't change a ton in my philosophy. The most this would do, if I were to finally accept a specific hypothesis, would be to possibly push me more in the direction of accepting the existence of a supernatural force, of supernatural forces. So to be a bit more spiritual in my philosophy, a bit more spiritual in my thinking, to accept things that are not just a natural phenomenon, I would become less of a natural philosopher and more of a natural plus, you know, the more mystical side of things. That definitely is a change, but that doesn't push me any closer to any particular unified philosophy. It just elevates me to a different side of it, pushes me to a different level, a different camp, so to speak. A camp with a lot of different tents, but a different camp nonetheless. But anyway, that is the completed story and where I will be going from there. I will continue to analyze these hypotheses, and I will not be continuing these experiences. Or these experiments. Of course, a lot of people might be thinking, well, you got to get more proof, but I ended up making the decision after a strange night in which I decided, you know what, I think I'm going to try doing it again, and ended up feeling like I was choking. It could have been anxiety, could have been anything. There's tons of psychological explanations, but I ended up sort of getting the impression that whether psychological or not, this was not a good idea. So I kind of made a resolution that I will not be continuing these experiments. But with that being said, I will continue to analyze the data I have, the data that others have used that I can connect to that, and just, see what I'm going to do, see what I'm going to change. If there's anything at all, I will keep you guys updated and hopefully talk about the implications separately in other videos, just ones dedicated to individual parts of it. My apologies for going on so long and so many bits and pieces. I've been recording takes of this for hours and I cannot get it right every time I do something wrong. Even in this one, I noticed little bits and pieces where I was like, whoa, I was repeating a word 15,000 times. But hopefully you will all forgive me and understand, and I will see you all in the next video.